G'day guys, it's no doubt that with Chaos Space Marines, one of the hardest parts of our game is selecting our secondary objectives. And in this video, I want to give you some practical advice specifically on the Long War secondary objective and give you a better understanding of when it's appropriate to take this secondary, when it's going to be optimally scoring high points for you, and when to avoid taking this secondary because it's a very nuanced secondary and it's very difficult to navigate. So I want to try to help you understand and try to maybe make it a little bit easier for you when you get to the tabletop and are trying to decide on which secondaries you would like to take. So with that being said, let's just jump straight into the video.
Welcome to the Black God.
G'day guys, those who've been following this channel for a while will remember the video I did not too long ago during Nephilim where I talked about pairing banners and Long War as two secondary objectives. And I basically made the case in great detail, but I basically made the case that those two secondaries pair really well together because if you take Raise the Banners High, your opponent is incentivized to go onto your objectives to tear down your banners. And if they do so, they're exposing themselves to the Long War, which means you're going to get more victory points for Long War if they try to stop you from taking banners. And if they don't, then you're going to get lots of points from banners. So either way, you're going to get a relatively good score from both of those. And you put your opponent in an interesting little paradox where they struggle to stop you from achieving one because doing so would help you achieve the other. So that was that video. What I want to do today is talk a little bit more about the Long War specifically, because I've had a few revelations on this secondary objective that I think are worth sharing. So it'll be a relatively short video because I'm just focusing on the single secondary for this one, but I think you'll find it interesting, or hopefully you'll find it interesting. And what I realized is, so Long War has changed. Now it's basically capped at 4 victory points a turn instead of 3. Which is not that big of a deal, but it's relevant. It does help. But one of the things that I've noticed that helps you when deciding which secondaries to take and helps you decide whether or not you want to take the Long War is looking at your opponent's army, looking at their plans, looking at the units that they have, and trying to predict whether or not you think they are going to take Raise the Banners High. Because whilst the Long War pairs really well with banners for you, it also pairs amazingly well if you think that your opponent is likely to take Raise the Banners High. Because if they take Raise the Banners High, in order for them to be raising those banners, they need to go onto objectives, which means that you'll be primed to take them off of those objectives, which will not only deny them their Raise the Banners High points, but it will also generate you Long War points. So if you're playing against somebody and you suspect that they're likely to take Raise the Banners High, then the Long War becomes a much more attractive option. And the reason it's worth noting these things is because the Long War on itself, I actually don't really like it as a secondary. You have to, if you're going to take the Long War, you really need to plan around it, because if you're playing a competent player, what they'll do is they will not deploy anything on any objectives, which means if you go first, you actually can't kill anything off of an objective and you can't take an objective off of them. So in half of your games, you're not going to be able to score a single point in that first battle round, which means you really only have 4 opportunities to score these points. And traditionally it was capped at 3, so that meant you were capped at a 12 at best. That's helped a little bit now that it's capped at 4, but it still presents a similar problem where your opponent has the ability to deny you those victory points by intentionally not going on to an objective. So, and like, if you don't take the Long War, for example, they can go, cool, I'm going to take Raise the Banners High, I'm going to move out onto an objective and raise the banner. I know my unit's going to get shot off that objective in the next turn, but it doesn't matter. I've gone out, I've raised my banner, and I'm happy with that, right? So, the Long War, it changes that dynamic, and it actually gives you the ability to go, okay, cool, now your opponent has a disincentive and they're less likely to want to go onto those objective markers because they know that in doing so, they are feeding you those victory points. There's a few other objectives in the game that are similar, like for example, the Sisters of Battle have their shrine, which is basically they get to pick one of the midfield objectives, and all they have to do is hold it at the end of their turn to score victory points. So if you are versing Sisters and you suspect that that's one of the secondaries they are likely to choose, well then choosing Long War is quite good, because it means that you can go and you're already going to be trying to take down that shrine. So now Long War becomes a much more attractive option. There's a few like the Necron ones, for example, where they need to be doing actions on objectives to score points, that sort of stuff. So anytime you're looking at your opponent's army and you suspect that they're going to take some kind of secondary that involves them being on the objective markers, that's when you want to take Long War. Whereas if you look at their army and you're like, okay, it's some kind of tower gun line, or guard gun line, they are going to spend the first 2, maybe 3 turns just not on any objectives, and they're just going to spend that time blasting me with bullets. Well, if that's the case, then you know that Long War is going to be atrocious in that matchup, because they're not going to be on the objectives for you to take from them, And often a smart opponent will actually sacrifice some of their primary score in the early turns in order to deny you that secondary. Because sometimes, especially if they get the bottom of the turn, they're going second, they'll be able to get the 45 primary anyway. They can have a few turns where they only score 4 victory points because they're only holding their own home objective. They don't push out, they don't capture any midfield, they let you have it. They score a few turns of 4, and then they really ramp it up in the later game and get a couple of 12s, maybe an 8, and then they go, for whatever the sub-primary is, the one where you've got, whatever the mission-specific primary objective is, they'll go for that. They'll generate a bunch of points off of that, and they'll end up with 45 primary, even though they had a few really bad turns early game. So sometimes they'll intentionally sacrifice that primary, and if you take the Long War, they will 100% be doing that to stop you from securing those primary points. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of touch on that and basically just sort of outline one of the ways that you can determine whether or not the Long War is a valid choice, and that is by looking at the potential secondaries you think your opponent is likely to select, and then selecting Long War if they are going to select one that requires them to be on objective markers. So yeah, let me know what you thought. Let me know what you think of this more short form sort of content. If you like this shorter stuff, let me know, because I'm just as happy to do the longer, more deep dive style ones where I combine a bunch of stuff together into one longer video. But I'm also more than happy to do these sort of short ones where I just jump on when I have a thought, record my thoughts, post it as a video, and you guys can sort of digest it piecemeal. Whichever works better, I'm happy either way. So let me know in the comments below what you think. And let me know what you think of the Long War as a secondary. Do you think it's worth it? Do you think it's too easy to counter? And do you think it's one of those things that's situationally amazing? Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers. Alrighty guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please like, subscribe, comment, all that good shit. If you want to get a shirt like this, you can hit up my Teespring account where you can pick them up. You can also pick up neoprene objective markers, and I'm also doing Patreon exclusive dice over on my Patreon. So if any of that sort of stuff interests you and you want to show your support for the channel, that's a fantastic way to do it. So with that being said, I'm going to cut it here. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.
Welcome to the Black God.